There we go. Right. Hello and welcome to this talk, Resilience in the Face of Hate. I am Dr. Rachel Cowart. I am the Research Director of Take This, and I am joined today by my colleague, Dr. Elizabeth Kilmer.
And I'm Dr. Elizabeth Kilmer. I am a qualitative researcher and clinical psychologist with Take This.
For those who aren't familiar with Take This, we are a mental health nonprofit, the oldest mental health nonprofit to work in the gaming space, and we aim to destigmatize mental health challenges and provide mental health information and support. The next slide just shows our beautiful faces. We already did an introduction, but if you're interested in reaching out, there's our contact information there on how to find us on Twitter. So at school, my 8-year-old was asked to make pop art with a phrase that someone could say, or in this case, someone could yell. And I'll be honest, when this piece of art came home, I was like, what was the assignment exactly? Because out of context, it's a little alarming. But, you know, help is a simple word that we yell when we are in offline danger. But in our digital spaces, that's not so easy to do. It's not so easy to yell for help. It's not so straightforward. So what options do we have to digitally yell for help? We can file a formal report, right? Which most gaming platforms have, and research finds most people do, though it's unclear what effect reactive responses like reporting actually has. That is, if that call leads to the help that you are seeking. You can ignore it, which I suppose is an advantage of it being a digital threat versus an immediate physical threat in most cases. You can try to ignore it if, let's say, you have no faith in the reporting system, or maybe you aren't sure how to use the formal reporting system. You can also block the offending user, which does help in the moment, but it doesn't really alert anyone else around you that something negative is happening or attention should be brought to it. You can publicly confront it, which less people do, but some people do. It does happen sometimes. You can mute your phone. You can engage in whisper networks, which means, you know, people, especially non-men, have been doing this for years. You share this information among your close group of friends. And again, while that helps in your immediate circle of influence, it doesn't really change the culture at large. And then last but not least, you can leave the space, which many people do. Many people are unwilling to engage in spaces where harm is happening, where they're being harassed, for instance, or they're being subjected to hate speech. Although that doesn't really seem like the ultimate solution. It seems like a lot of lost money and also not, you know, the kind of digital space that we want to have and see in the world, right? We want to be in spaces where we can stay and feel that we are safe. But the truth is, none of these options that I'm showing you here today are particularly effective at either changing the behavior of the offending individual, shifting the culture, the environment, or bringing any kind of comfort and support to the victim. And over time, this has led to an overwhelming statement that any of these actions that are available to us, any of these actions taken, will not lead to actual action or substantive change, which is encapsulated in this statement. I don't believe that action will lead to action. I don't believe what I do will do anything. Now, this perception, and in some cases reality, of the ineffectiveness of moderating our digital playgrounds has a lot of repercussions. It has learned helplessness, right, as encapsulated in this quote. But another repercussion it has is creating a culture where hate and harassment are normalized. In fact, gamer culture, or what has come to be known as toxic gamer culture, is defined by this cultural justification, this normalization of toxic, hateful, deviant behaviors. They're an accepted part of the experience of being in our digital playgrounds, of being in these gaming spaces. And this isn't just me talking. Actually, most people agree. In our most recent work, we asked broadly if players thought toxic behavior was culturally justified. They believed that toxicity was an acceptable social norm in gaming cultures, and most people said yes. Now, we purposely left this question open and vague to let people broadly define what they considered toxic. But when we took it one step forward and asked specifically about hateful behavior, for instance, hate speech, is that an acceptable social norm? Again, most people said yes. Now, what struck me about these findings were two things. First, if you rotate them, they look a lot like Angry Pac-Man. But second was the realization that the normalization of toxic and hateful behavior has opened the door for more extreme actions to become normalized. Hate speech is not and should not be considered a common facet of any culture, including the culture of gaming spaces. So we asked our participants another question. We asked them if they thought extreme ideologies that are extremely different from the norm, things like misogyny, racism, anti-LGBTQIA sentiment, white nationalism, anti-government sentiment, and Islamism. Are these ideas embedded or fixed or normalized within gamer cultures? And most of them said yes. The lowest endorsement was anti-government, but still 1 in 5, about 20% of people said, yes, this is an accepted normalized social norm in gaming spaces. Now, there are a lot of reasons why hate, harassment, extreme ideologies have become quote unquote normalized, and why is an important question I cannot answer in the next 3 minutes that I have on this stage. But the takeaway I want to give you all here is that the normalization of hateful rhetoric and action in games has created a space more vulnerable for extreme ideologies to take hold and actions to unfold. So for the last year, Dr. Kilmer and I and our partners at Middlebury and Logically AI have been looking at the state of games in relation to extreme actions and ideologies to try to figure out what are the strategies in this space, what's working, what's not, what tools do gaming companies have at their disposal, what programs do we need to develop to better combat extremism in games. Now, you may be thinking that escalated quickly. Why are we talking all of a sudden now about extremism and not focusing on, let's say, other forms of garden variety hate, harassment, and toxicity? Well, there are a few reasons. The first is that there's evidence to suggest that extremism in games specifically is a growing problem, not just in our culture around us, but in games specifically. Games are a reflection of culture, but games also generate culture as they are the largest form of entertainment media in the world. And if you want to play devil's advocate and say that this problem has always been there, I will concede that to you. But I will say concern about these topics has grown exponentially, as evidenced by Constance Steinkuhler being on the stage just last year, talking about the same topic, extremism in games. Secondly, governments are becoming increasingly interested in this topic as we see terroristic acts being linked to gaming communities. We're seeing the gamification of violence. We saw it with the Buffalo and Christchurch shootings. We also saw games linked to the recent leak of government secrets on a community in Discord. So extreme ideologies and actions in games are coming with a significant range of real-world repercussions, which is leading to increased governmental interest. And lastly, and most importantly, gaming companies are very unprepared. Grossly unprepared for this. Now, a lot of the unpreparedness has to come from the fact that these conversations aren't happening, and Dr. Kilmer is going to talk about that in a minute. A lot of gaming companies are very willing to talk about toxicity as a broad term, but extremism, not so much, because to be fair, it is a difficult conversation to have. But we cannot grow and learn and change if we do not have these conversations. Earlier this year, U.S. Representative Lori Trahan sent a letter to 14 gaming companies asking them how they are addressing extremism specifically in games. And of the 14 she contacted, 9 did not detail any efforts to address extremism in games, despite being directly asked. And only 1 noted they had a dedicated team to terrorism and violent extremism. So to fill this gap, we went to the top minds of design, community, and trust and safety to uncover best practices, wants, and needs, and ask them how they're addressing these challenges and how we can better foster resilience in the face of hate. But before I turn it over to Dr. Kilmer, I just want to clarify one thing, that when we're talking about extremist exploitation of gaming spaces, we are not just talking about one thing. We are talking about radicalization and recruitment. We're talking about the normalization of extreme ideologies like racism and misogyny. But we're also talking about the mobilization of already radicalized individuals in these spaces, the dissemination of propaganda, the fundraising of money for extremist causes. There's a whole entire network of actions that are happening in gaming spaces. And with our work, what we're seeking to understand is how do we develop resiliency among gaming communities to withstand all of these actions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Kilmer.
Thanks, Rachel. As Dr. Gort mentioned, we've been conducting focus groups with professionals in the games industry to better understand how different companies are conceptualizing and combating hate, harassment, and extremism in their communities and gaming communities more broadly. We asked questions about what strategies they're currently utilizing, the challenges and roadblocks they encounter, and resources they would like to see developed. We also explored the role of industry, government, and society more broadly in addressing hate and extremism in games. We conducted 15 focus groups with 35 professionals from AAA, AA, and indie studios, as well as publishers and studio-adjacent companies, such as moderation and player support companies. You can see some of those studios highlighted here. 46% of participants are in design-related roles, while 29% were in community management and 26% were in trust and safety-related roles. Our participants had an average of about 12 years working in the games industry, with a range of 1 to 34 years. While we're excited to continue to expand the number of groups we're communicating with through future workshops, we're really happy with the breadth of experience we captured in this particular round. Altogether, we gathered 1,170 minutes of conversation as a jumping off point to develop resources to support the industry. In these conversations, we captured a wealth of information about the current state and capacity of studios to manage hate and extremism in their communities, as well as common strategies and needs across the industry. In the next year, we'll be conducting interactive workshops and providing written resources to support continued conversation and innovation within the industry around supporting resilient gaming communities. Though we don't have time to dive into all we found today, I want to introduce several key topics and practical next steps that emerged in this work. The first is understanding the scope of the problem and the industry's readiness to address these challenges. Dr. Cohort has already spoken about the player perspective, and participants in our focus group are reporting similar information. Extremist exploitation of games and gaming communities is a big problem. And at this moment, we as an industry do not have the tools needed to effectively combat extremist exploitation of games. Many devs, especially those in community management, moderation, and trust and safety roles, express that current mitigation efforts often feel like a game of whack-a-mole that they aren't winning. Though about 70% of participants have had at least one conversation about the potential for extremist exploitation of their games, these conversations were reported to be rare unless someone was specifically in a role designed to address hate and extremism, which many studios don't have. Notably, many of the individuals in community management or player support roles reported frequent exposure to extremist content as part of their role, but little training or support on how to best mitigate this content or to mitigate the personal impact it has on them. The industry isn't currently where it needs to be to effectively combat extremism, but there are pockets of innovation around these topics in studios of all sizes. To develop strategies around early detection and community resilience, studio and industry-wide conversations about these topics are vital. Second, even when we are having these conversations about extremism, many of them happen behind closed doors for good reasons. But the results of these conversations shouldn't always stay opaque to consumers. Clarity about a studio or a game's values and community expectations can be a powerful tool in supporting community resilience. One participant shared their story of a pivotal moment in their studio's decision-making around public statements of support and community guidelines. This story is likely reflective of many studios' experiences. Early in Gamergate, they made the decision not to make any public statements about what was happening, as they were worried that would pull more trolls to their game, and they wanted to keep their community safe. What they found, though, was the opposite happened. Without an explicit statement from the studio that toxic, misogynistic behavior was not welcome, the studio found that pro-Gamergate individuals assumed this game was a safe space for them to build community. Now, I can't offer a blanket statement about which topics you should address publicly and which you shouldn't. That will be influenced by your game, studio values, and other contextual factors. However, I do want to highlight the studio's experience, as I'm sure it's not isolated. By choosing not to take a public stand, by not making a public statement, this studio made the choice to let their community and the larger community make assumptions about their stance. While this is a practice strategy by many companies who want to sell to both sides of the aisle, you must understand the consequences of the choice that you're making. Psychologically, we often feel more comfortable not making a choice about something we're uncomfortable or unsure about. But in many cases, this not making a choice is making a choice. This isn't just about public statements about issues like Gamergate. This also includes what is and is not included in your community guidelines or terms of service. When you attempt to let your community choose what you stand for by failing to provide clear structure and expectations, you're often letting a small, vocal, and privileged part of the community choose, and it may not reflect the opinions of the larger community at all. Now, you don't need to be a counterterrorism expert. People in games often wear a lot of hats. It's common when new technologies or strategies show up to jump in and learn on the fly. That doesn't mean you have to be the experts in everything. Bring experts in early in the design process. That way they can help with the brainstorming and the building. Many studios treat experts kind of like inspectors. They come in at the very end and they let you know what's not up to code, what you have to take out, what you have to get rid of or add on, and those additions will be expensive. Instead, I want you to think about counterterrorism and community management and accessibility experts as early design consultants. Think about when you build a house. You don't want to bring the electrician in after the walls are up. They'll just tell you what you can't do and what you need to fix, and it will all be expensive. If you don't like bringing in experts because they're giving you costly fixes or just telling you what you can't do, it's possible that you're bringing them in too late. Bringing them in earlier may radically change your experience with those experts. Additionally, the kind of strategies and tools you use should be tailored to your game and community, but it's unlikely your game and community are so unique that you can't build off of or benefit from tools that have been built already. If it feels that way, you likely need to consult an expert for them to help you design your strategy. We repeatedly talk to professionals who built moderation or management tools from scratch that already existed elsewhere. Experts can help you identify existing tools to tailor and prevent duplication of work. Now, we understand that having these conversations can be scary. We're well aware that games are near consistently misunderstood and vilified by the public and policymakers. We had one person who declined to participate in the groups tell us, "I don't think there are safe spaces for game companies at the moment to discuss topics like extremism." This person was in leadership at a AAA studio. AAA studios had significant power to influence the culture of the industry broadly. And if individuals in leadership at these studios are unable or unwilling to participate in conversations about extremism, it has wide-reaching negative implications for the entire industry's ability to develop solutions. To be clear, I do not think this individual does not care, but they may feel unsafe or unempowered to have meaningful and productive conversations. And though their individual intent may be positive, the negative impact remains the same. I do have a pretty big glimmer of hope here, though. It's scarier outside of this conversation than it is inside. Talking about this can feel uncomfortable and icky at first, but we receive feedback from professionals across the industry who participated in our groups that even participating in a focus group helps them feel more heard, less alone, and gave them actionable strategies to take back to their team. And remember, at this stage of the project, these focus groups were simply designed to give us as researchers more information. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you this is going to be easy. It's not. But you didn't get into games to take it easy. The most consistent theme across the conversations we had were how much devs cared about their games, their teams, and their communities. Hate, harassment, and extremism are roadblocks to that. These conversations require lots of nuance, much more than we can fit into a 20-minute talk. Having productive conversations about combating extremism doesn't mean you can't make shooting games or competitive games, or that you have to make less violent games. That's not what we're saying. Getting better at dealing with extremism and combating the hate and harassment that exists in gaming communities means that you'll be able to spend more time making games and sharing them with the communities you care about most. Thank you so much for coming today.